Good morning. So just an introduction for myself. My name is Michael Johnson. I run global sales here at MetricStream, and it's an honor to be in front of you guys today. We're going to bring the chairs up here for our next panel. So we got a little construction going on. If I could, I just want to introduce our esteemed panelists. They're going to be joining me this morning. We got Marty Froelich. Marty is Senior Vice President, Risk Manager at First Citizens. Come on up, Marty. We have Michael Cover. He's back up here again. He's going to be worn out today. Director, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Michigan. And last but certainly not least, Michelle Melendez, Vice President, Head of Integrated Risk, Security Risk Management at Aon. So our topic today is going to be the 3 lines of defense. And so before we get started, if I could just ask the audience, by a show of hands here, how many of you use the formal 3 lines of defense model in your business currently? Getting out of the way here. Show of hands here. So this is going to be a pretty relevant topic, I think, for everybody here in the room. And I think this will be impactful. So if everybody could have a seat, that'd be great. So my first question is going to go to Marty. And Marty, we talked about addressing connected risks across the organization. Collaboration across the 3 lines of defense is a key part of that. Can you talk about the 3 lines of defense model and what it means to you and your organization?
Yeah, Michael, the first thing I'd like to point out is a comment that Gura made yesterday, a term he used, and he said frontline. And it occurred to me that that's a very good distinction, that while we're talking about 3 lines of defense amongst ourselves, right? The real customer, in my mind, is the front line, the folks whose risks we're trying to manage. And we have to keep them in mind. The organization I'm currently at has only recently implemented a formal first line. There was a second and obviously a third line for forever. So getting used to that first line being between the second and the front has been an adjustment. And one thing that I think about, and it's kind of a quick way to put this, and it pulls together a lot of the things like Michael said, Gavin said, Beth and others, is when you talk to your customer, your frontline business unit, and you ask them, how effective the entire program is, first and second line, I like to reduce it to a very simple question. Ask them, hey, am I doing things to you, for you, or with you? And that answer is very illuminating in terms of how mature that program is and how much buy-in you have accomplished with the front line. Are you there to really help them and partner with them, or do they see you as just an annoyance that gets in the way of their making money? So to, for, or with is a pretty easy 3-word way of looking at do you add value?
Great, thank you. Michelle, your thoughts on what it means to you, the 3 lines of defense model in your organization?
So we are at Aon just starting to embark on the 3 lines. So Marty, I'll be talking to you about your lessons learned as well. We have the second and third today, but starting to think about what the first looks like. I think as we start to look at decentralized type management of risk and cyber, that can be many different things on the first line. It could be a focused risk management function that rolls back up into a security function, or it could be part of a development team, like a security champion, a business person that could be the front line. I think it's up to each organization to decide what that looks like, but trust is important. Being able to talk to the business, understand, help them prioritize is important, and then work with the second and the third in the same conversation. So I've seen it done many different ways over the course of my career. I think the one that has worked the best for the first line has been when they've been truly embedded with that the business, the technologist, whoever they're working with, either physically sitting with them, attending their stand-ups, all of that, not just throwing reports over the wall.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. Michael, your thoughts?
So I'll say this from a healthcare perspective, we've been living and breathing three lines model forever. I think it's kind of the easiest way to kind of put it. So when we consider across the board, I think we're all kind of, if you look at it, on how we've set everything up from Michigan's perspective, but this is just pretty much every health plan that I talk to has a similar type of model. Our first line's at the point now where we actually have, we'll kind of call line 1.5 inside that first line. These are areas of oversight within major regulated functions. So as an example, in our Medicare Advantage business, heavily regulated piece of legislation, we have an oversight group. And their job is really to coordinate across that function, across our MA plan, to be able to say, look, what controls are we monitoring? What are our policies? What are our risks? What are our issues? And they're there. And then from a second line of defense, our enterprise compliance group works hand in hand with them in monitoring and managing those types of items. And then it runs up to the third line from our enterprise audit perspective. But we're in a different mindset. Our maturity scale and where we're at today is we're optimized across the board from an enterprise perspective. We talk about the three lines holistically that way.
Great. Thank you. So, Michelle, question for you. How can the three lines of defense work together more effectively? What advice would you have to improve coordination and communication for the model?
Yeah. So going back to, the first line being able to work strongly with who they're working with and translate what the second line's looking for, instead of, I've seen the second line, sadly, send reports of 50,000 things, frankly, to the business or the technologist to do. The first line can help translate the priorities of those 50,000 things and really work with them to make sure that it's taken care of in a prioritized fashion, and then work with the second line to translate back what they're doing. I think, the second line and the third line being aligned should help, at the end of the day, make the third line's job a little bit easier when they say, hey, these are the things that you should really go look at, where we see gaps in the organization from the reporting we've done and talking to the first line.
Excellent. Marty, your thoughts?
Again, in a maturing organization with a lower level of maturity than what Michael has described, but nevertheless a very large organization, trying to make effective use of things that the third line, the second line, and the first line know, be not only efficient with the front line's time and energy, but also to learn from each other. For instance, making sure that our audit organization, as an example, is familiar with and comfortable with the results of our RCSA, so that when they put together their audit plans, they're absorbing as much of that information as possible, not replicating it unnecessarily, and so forth. And it works both ways. That we need to know from audit's perspective and how they look at things, and their standards and their scales might be different, but nonetheless the information is the same. How do we incorporate that into what we're doing, RCSA, loss management, any of those program elements, so that we're kind of, the term has been used several times, we're singing off the same sheet of music. We're not only effective with the business's time, but we're also effective in terms of managing the risk.
Just jumping in on that point, I think the biggest aspect that you can have when you're moving through that piece of the process is not only the people and aligning on things like the RCSA as an example, but it's the tools and the technology that you use to get the information from each line, right? So where is the business entering the data? How are they managing? How are they monitoring? How is that feeding into the compliance organization within the second line? How is that feeding into the third line? How is the third line reaching back down into the first line to gain intelligence and information across the board for things like your annual risk assessment from an enterprise audit, from an internal audit perspective, and what that looks like? You hit that sweet spot when you have that tool integration. And when you have that data that's coming in consistently, effectively, and efficiently, and it's transposable between the various lines. So like as an example, our internal audit function, they go into our GRC solution, they go into MetricStream, and they can easily see for each one of those functions that's in the tool, hey, what's your internal control structure look like? What's your policy look? What are your current policies up to date? What are the risks that you've been monitoring against? How, what's your risk assessment, your annual list of your risk assessment, quarterly, semi-annually, monthly, whatever that various area is doing? What are they identifying from a business perspective is their hot topic right now? And now our enterprise audit functions looking at it, pulling that information in detail, and then turning around and going into the compliance area to say kind of the same thing. Let me see your latest report. Is it 50,000 words? Is it 25 pages? Is it 3 pages? Who knows? But pulling that detail holistically to kind of change the way that they are auditing the business. Because when you talk about that, you know, am I doing this with you? Am I doing it for you? Am I doing it to you? Hey, everyone, I'm just dumb question. Raise your hand if you've been audited before, right? We all kind of know that feeling, right? Where that knock happens on the door. And depending upon that knock, you're thinking to yourself, uh-oh, or here we go, or I don't have time for this right now, right? So the tools that we use and the technology that we use have changed the way that our audit function functions. I know it's back-to-back functions, but it works. It's in a space now where that knock is different. It feels different. The audit's changed a little bit. They come in and they say, I now have your policies. I now see your risks. I see your assessments. I see your controls. I see what's passing and what's failing. And now I'm saying, show me that thing and why that risk is changing, or why you feel that it's growing across the maturity scale for you. Is it going up? Is it going down, sideways? Why? So we're having a ton of success that way. And it's all, again, that aligns back to the, are you doing this to me, for me, with me?
And if I might add one thing, it's kind of a success story. Beth was part of it. Adrian, who's with MetricStream now, was at GE, was part of it. There's Nate Kulik from Citi who's here. We were all part of a team, and one of our success stories, because it took a lot of work at the ground level. When we first implemented the GRC system from MetricStream with issue management, we had, it was probably more than 6 months. I hope it was less than a year, but it was ongoing discussions with our audit group because they had a very different set of perspectives and standards for what an audit issue was. We wanted to make sure that the business could holistically see all of their issues regardless of where they came from. And we had a lengthy but very successful collaboration with our audit group. And they kind of opened their kimono a little bit to, oops, did I turn my mic off? Did I just mess up here? There we go. To basically incorporate into the overall issue management module of MetricStream what they needed and what we needed. And I consider that one of our great success stories because it was not easy. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Great observations. Michael, question for you. How specifically can you engage the front line? What role do they play in risk management?
They're the cornerstone. So when you're engaging across from a risk management perspective, right, you're going to gain the most intelligence from the people that are in the day-to-day. I think there was a conversation yesterday around, hey, how do I'm considering surveying all employees and all staff. And what does that look like and how do you do that? That level of engagement in the day-to-day is a completely different mindset from where risk management, risk mitigation, and just discussion in general was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, your risk assessment processes were all senior level leadership and that's it. You know, back in my external audit days, you'd go and you talk to the senior executives in that particular area and say, what's your greatest risk right now? And they'd tell you, oh, they go through their items, or these are my top 5 things that I care about. But you would then go and actually do the physical audit itself, and you'd be talking to the individual contributor, that first line leader, maybe the manager, and it's a completely different set of things. And so understanding that how you get that level of detail into your risk assessment process and understanding across the 3 lines, those folks are the people that are going to give you some of the greatest insights that you can get. In a lot of cases, that alignment's going to happen, those top 5 things, whatever, senior leadership all the way down. But the intelligence that you can get and the insight you can get from that particular individual that's doing the work, that's living that particular process day in and day out, could be talking to your customers, could be talking to your members, could be talking to whoever, it's invaluable.
Excellent. Michelle, your thoughts on engaging the front line?
So I agree with Michael. You get a lot of the insights from the front line. I think that they also help us with different perspective, frankly. When it comes to prioritization, we think everything's important. Everything needs to be done today. And the business doesn't necessarily agree with that, or the technologist. And I think the front line is a glue that helps translate both, helps tell us, hey, this isn't a priority right now, and here's why. But also talks to the business and says, this is a priority, and here's why. And I think that is the key part of that person.
Excellent. So Marty, it sounds like the front line has the finger on the pulse. What are your thoughts?
It's, if you think about it, risk could almost be considered the tail that wags the dog. You don't want to be the tail that wags the dog. Without that business, you wouldn't have the processes, you wouldn't have the risk, you wouldn't have the revenue. So that's what it's all about. To extend that just a little bit, in order to get that value to them, right? I think the term taxonomy has been used at least 4 times this morning, and I heard it repeatedly yesterday, and it is a critical foundational element of what we do so we can consistently talk about things. But I would point out to most of us, because we don't have too many frontline folks here, that just explaining and getting a depth of understanding about what the taxonomy definitions are and the categories are absorbed by our frontline customers whose risks are described by that taxonomy is something that shouldn't be overlooked. You need to make sure that it sounds, in your mature organization, they probably could recite it in their sleep. My organization, they might not even know that there is a taxonomy in a formal fashion.
That's a really good point. So how we were able to move the taxonomy and the scale, we started when we started our GRC program back in 2012. We started with those foundational elements, those things, to be able to make sure we were talking the same language, left hand, right hand, we're all talking the same way. But what we found pretty quickly when we talked about, we were going through, and Beth was talking about how you keep that up to date, how you maintain, how you manage that piece of it. I'll say this, we figured out really quickly that leadership understood what the risk categories were, what the definitions were, how we were updating them, but how we drove that message home with that first line all the way down. We pulled together what we kind of refer to affectionately as the risk playbook. And that risk playbook is really a policy that is certified to, it comes up in our annual compliance training. It's available there. The entire enterprise goes through, they have access to it, they look at it, they can see it. But it's that aspect of, and that document itself allows us to make sure that it's not this tail wagging the dog as much as possible, and that we're trying to talk the same language, and you're making sure that people understand what those taxonomies are and how they tie back through. It's not really a policy, we don't call it a policy, but it's a playbook that we use regularly throughout our enterprise, and it's across not just Blue Cross, but all of our subsidiaries. We roll it out like immediately at each one of our subs, so we've had a ton of success with that.
Excellent. Marty, coming back to you, this is something I hear consistently. How do you start the journey? And so what's your best advice for the audience on how do you embark on this 3 lines of defense journey? Where do you start?
There were some comments in the previous session about where do you start also, and you can't go to the front line with a blank sheet of paper and say, I'm from risk and I'm here to make your life better. Show me the value. So I truly think it goes back to that having a program with a description of what it is that you're going to help manage, how you describe it, the taxonomy and the structure, so that when you're selling them on your existence, which you might not have existed a year or so before. And so, hey, I've gotten through my career just fine without these layers. Well, I'm now here to help. That's a sell that you have to make. And so you need to come prepared with what is the value that I'm going to return to you. And it can't be because the regulators say so. It has to be more than that. That was talked about yesterday in the closing comments. So having a clearly communicated value proposition to someone who doesn't know they need to buy it is the first step.
Great. Michelle, your thoughts on that, getting started?
Yeah, so because we're at the start of our journey, I would agree. You have to articulate the value of what they bring. I spent a little bit of time in the technology organization in a previous role and naively thought like, hey, I'm going to come in here and help all these technologists understand why security is important. And what I found when I got there is they all thought security and risk management was important. They had other priorities and they really were starving for somebody to just help them understand, again, the priorities and the value that that person was bringing. So the first line sat down with them and said, hey, let me take all of the things that we're asking you to do and set it in a prioritized order so you don't have to think about it. And now I'm just giving you more a list and a roadmap almost of things that I need you to do, which they could understand and save them so much time at the end of the day and hit our objectives as well.
Great. So, Michael, Marty talked about getting people to buy in. What kind of pushback do you get from people buying in? Maybe your thoughts around that.
If you're able to not only articulate the value, but you have the alignment from top to bottom, I think the biggest thing when you're dealing from a 3 lines perspective, it's the competing priorities. Michelle, you're spot on with that first line. Because if you go into an area and you're like, look, their job's to sell the business, what value are you bringing? You want to be able to say, I could talk to you. I could talk to you about how I'm managing risk within my area. I could tell you the things that I care about, my top 5, my top 10, whatever it is. And I can come talk to me, once a year, and that's okay. But if you're in my face and you're talking to me constantly, like either quarterly, monthly, things of that nature, you're impacting their ability to do their jobs, right? And if they're there to sell business and that's what they're supposed to do, that's really what they want to focus on. So you have to flip the conversation and let them and get them involved in understanding what the value is, and you let them to see the value in the communication, in what the information that they're providing and the updates that they're providing, and why you care about the risks that they see within the organization, they see within the enterprise, and how that ties and feeds the information to your second line, how that ties and feeds into your third line, and how that ties into all your regulators. So it kind of pulls a whole circle. But the whole thing is just the pushback that you see is this doesn't impact my day-to-day job, but then getting them to see that it does impact their day-to-day job. And once you can get them to kind of flip a little bit, you'll get better information for your second and your third line.
Great. Well, we got a couple of minutes left here, and I just wanted to open it up to the audience. Any questions from anybody in the audience as it relates to the 3 lines of defense they want to ask the panel? Or weigh in, question, or comment from anybody in the audience? All right, I'm good. Oh, Adrian's got a question.
Yeah, so we have from a Blue Cross perspective, we have varying levels of oversight that actually sit within the business. And their purpose from a functional perspective is to help the first line manage those things, manage their policies, manage their issues, manage their risks. And they're like the first, that kind of communication point for the second line or the third line. And that allows that first line to focus really heavily on their tasks, their day-to-day jobs, their piece, whatever their core function is, So we've got we affectionately refer to it as level 1.5. You can't go at Michigan, you go in, you look at our annual audit plan, you look through the 3 lines models and everything that we do goes to all the various committees, the risk committees, the audit committees, the compliance committees, and there's a dotted line in the first line, and we affectionately refer to that as level 1.5.
If I might say something about that, because for Citizens, we're going through an acquisition, and that the acquired organization had essentially a 1.5 organization. We've got a first, second, and third line. And I'm a first line risk manager, and I report directly into the leader of the business division where my customers reside. So I report to that individual and I apply the program, but I am independent of the other first line risk managers. Now, the 1.5 in the organization that we're acquiring had kind of a head of the 1.5 with a number of people, and that's who they reported to, but then they were assigned to those businesses. Now, in an immature organization, I actually see some value in a structure like that, because with a brand new first line structure, especially if you're large enough and you have a number of first line risk managers, that cohesion is maybe harder to attain. It's not like you get together unless you organize something. Your consistency of experience and backgrounds might be a little bit different. Under a 1.5, there's somebody more responsible for making sure that playing field levels out. So there are pros and cons to that, and I think advantages. It like almost everything about how you put your programs together, it is a function of the organization and its culture, and you just need the, one size doesn't fit all, and you find what works best for your organization.
Great. So time is up. It's going to conclude the panel. I just want to personally thank Michael, Marty, and Michelle for your insights. How about a round of applause for this great panel? And with that, I'm going to call Pat back up here.